This talk is a world historic talk. You will see it yourself as I start and go on further. My idea was to break it up into a few pieces, and instead of going straight through with my outline and go through, to stop and have a little discussion first, and then we could either put it on the camera or take it off. It makes no difference, but at least it'll get you guys into the picture and you'll see for yourself where you are and how you're understanding what I'm talking about. But this is a world historic talk. Okay, so as you saw from David's blurb, the focus of attention in the big picture is sexuality. Human sexuality. That's the overall big topic. And more specifically, it's an endeavor to understand the two fundamental places in the Chumash where sexuality is the topic. So the first one is in the chapter 2 of Breshit. We have over there that a man, and every word is important. A man shall leave his parents, okay? And davak leishto, davak is dvekut, is like devek, glue. Stick to, bond with. We have to work on the language, but the general meaning, like devek, stick and glue, and stick to his wife. We're talking now the husband. We're talking about marriage relation. We're not getting into other things, though there are many implications from what I'll say for other things, homosexuality and so forth. But we're sticking now to the paradigm here. They're talking about a husband and a wife, and his wife. And talking about the directive to the man to leave his parents, cleave to his wife, la Basar Echad. Not ka Basar Echad, but la Basar Echad. So the first one of the problems is that's certainly concerned with the relation between the man and the male and the female, the husband and wife, and it's carried by these two phrases: davak leishto, la Basar Echad. Now the other place in the text, in the same text, a few psukim later, is that when Adam Rishon, in the second story, Chava, Eve, wasn't born yet. So in the second story of the creation, in the first story it's male and female, God created them and He created the species and so on. Now we're dealing with Eve. And Eve was not created in the second story. So the second story is the Gan Eden story, and it gives you a whole picture of how Eve was made. Okay, but before we get to that, those psukim, which itself is, when I tell you, you'll blow the mind. But anyway, and before that, it says that God brought all the animals, all animal life, to Adam, and whatever He called them would be their name. Okay, that itself is a big thing. What that's all about. For me, as you know, I'm very big on the performative. Right there is the exemplification of the performative that Adam Rishon said, Harei zeh lion, Harei zeh kelev. That's the name of the animal. Okay, that's not for tonight. However, before we get to the pasuk that reflects the sexuality, so it says he looked around, he couldn't find a mate. He couldn't find Ezer Kenegdo. Intuitively, we're talking about a female helper, a female half that he found. When he found her, then everything was okay, and we go further into the rest of the Gan Eden story, which is about the tree of life and all the rest of the stuff, which is, for tonight, tangential. What's important is the focus of attention on two fundamental phrases, which are the first indications, and in the beginning chapters, first indications of I shouldn't say man, woman, but husband, wife, sexuality. There's Basar Echad and there's ezer kenegdo. And so the problem arises, what do these phrases mean?
Coincident oppositorum.
Okay, what do these phrases mean? And wait, I'll come back. What do these phrases mean? Okay, so the first is we're going to deal with the linguistic before we get to the conceptual side. So we'll start with the meaning of echad in the phrase. It's Basar Echad. What does echad mean in that phrase?
Unit. No?
Yeah, unit, okay. But more specifically, we say General Eisenhower. What's the word for general in Hebrew?
Aluf.
Aluf. In Hebrew, it's very interesting. That alone is interesting because general is a epistemological word.
Aluf.
General is an epistemological word meaning klal, generality, which is comes from logic and epistemology.
Klal?
Okay?
Aluf.
So, aluf,
General is a klal.
General.
the name of the officer.
Ah, general, yeah.
The name of the officer. That's what I say. So I'm saying it's so interesting that in English we say General Eisenhower, General Patton, but there the word for general, leader, whatever you want to explain it, is coming from logic and epistemology. That's not for tonight, but that's a whole interesting thing of the culture and how the word. But for Hebrew, the word for general in the army is aluf. Then there's aluf mishneh, and they have different ranks, but the highest rank is aluf. Okay, now that was not initiated by contemporary Israel. It was taken over from the use of the word aluf or elef in biblical Hebrew and throughout the prophet period in the Gemara and so forth. The notion that aluf means what we would say miyuchad. In modern Hebrew we say miyuchad, special, unique, very particular. So in the phrase of Basar Echad, we're saying that this union was special. It was carrying the meaning of miyuchad. They don't have the word miyuchad in the Chumash, in the Bible, neither in Nach nor in the Chumash. So they have the word echad, but in number of contexts, echad means special. And I have a list. We don't have to read them. I'll read a little bit here. Roni looked up for me a number of psukim where we're talking about echad, but we're talking about the people, or something in the Beit HaMikdash, or something that's special. In the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, what does the Echad mean? The Echad in that pasuk means Hashem Elokeinu is special.
Supreme.
Is special.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So even though the word is in the text, echad, the meaning is elef or aluf. Okay? And so there are a number of psukim here. You'll be able to eventually get them all. But anyway, the kinship community, for example, when it's mentioned in Klal Yisrael, the Israel as a whole, and it could talk about the people. That's the subject of the sentence. It's talking about the people as a nation, as a people, And it could say the word echad, referring to the people, doesn't mean quantitatively one person. It means the collective called the people are special. And indeed, another proof of the pudding is of the meaning of the word echad. That's what we're talking about. My teacher...
Mika Amacha Yisrael Goy Echad
Nachon.
One nation in the earth? That's not really a...
Right.
Chiddush.
Exactly. I mean...
Goy Echad. That's
exactly.
special.
Okay, so the point is here, we're not talking about the number one, the quantity. We're talking about an extrapolation or a dimension of the word which moves it into a different realm in terms of quality. We're not talking about numbers, we're talking about the quality. Further, there are a number of psukim where it's talking about the people or whatever, and it says Elef. And it's been translated or mistranslated as 1,000.
Yeah.
Well, but if it means not the quantity, the number of the people, but the collectivity as a whole, in fact, it could be 800 in body count. If you counted them, it could be 800 people, but it's called Elef because the 800 people are in quality terms, the highest, the best, the one and only, the unique, the particular. So there are a number of places, I won't take the time to read it, but there are a number of places where you see obviously that it means, Echad means miyuchad, and further, they're talking about, when it comes to quantity, Elef doesn't mean 1,000. My Kabbalah teacher, David Slutskin, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says, had 24,000 students. Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 Talmidim. 24,000 students is half a ballpark.
Cosmic. Something.
Now, there is exaggeration, fine. But my teacher told me at that time, it does not mean 24,000 heads. It means 24,000 prize, special, high-level students. It means 24, not 24,000. He got this from his teachers in the Kabbalah, who had the tradition that when it came to this Rabbi Akiva point, it's wrong to translate it in quantitative terms as 24,000. 24,000, where are you going to put them all? How long is it going to teach? How long is it going to take you to teach 24,000? Who has 24,000 students? The biggest university doesn't have 24,000 students.
This is before the internet even.
Right. Okay, so here was another example of a general principle in the Chumash that numbers are not always quantitative, how many, but are qualitative. And that's a general principle that runs through the text in many places. I'm only limiting it now to the discussion or the attempt to clarify what does echad mean in the phrase. Okay?
Well, you could say
Now, yeah.
the 24,000, they could be all captains of 1,000.
Well, but
Like
okay.
Yitro told Moshe.
Yeah, okay, but
captains
this
of
is
thousands, captains of
that's a good point.
hundreds.
But in the context that you're talking about, in the Chumash, the context is the big numbers. Here we're talking about students.
Yeah, but you could say about Yosef also.
Yeah, well,
you know, from the
that
top down.
hasn't- that-
But it doesn't it substantiates rather than.
Yeah, well,
it
okay.
gives,
Well, you could. Everybody,
strength to what
nobody
you
has
say.
taken it. Nobody has taken it. People have taken it as 24,000, literally. It's a quantity,
Cosmic number.
But it's way beyond. If you call it an exaggeration, okay, there are some exaggerations, but this one is way out of line, and it has an alternative. When you have an alternative, you can weigh the two pieces and see which one makes more sense. Anyway, this was the tradition that he received from his teachers in the Kabbalah, that when it came to 22, this piece in the Gemara, it meant 24 heads, 24 prize students. That was the basic point. Okay, now, for the moment, let's leave the thing open, because this is going to be an ongoing inquiry until we get closure on what these phrases mean. We're now taking the echad phrase and opening up the possibility that it means special. And it could be indeed that it does mean special. On the other hand, it could be, and it has been taken for centuries, as being a quantity. Namely, there were two people. There was husband, wife, who are now le Basar Echad. So there were, the way it was understood, there were two people who, in some respect, were one. Where one now is not only, it could be translated important, special, but it also could be translated as quantitatively one. Okay. Now when it's translated like that, before we get to the meaning of basar, we're in the domain of the non-literal. We can't take it, we can't take the meaning of one, of echad, as one, in a literal way, because the text is, in the context, has two people. Two individual people who are one in certain respects. When they have relations, when they study, when they do this, so in certain respects we can think of them as one, and that is a metaphor. And that is the way the word has been translated, the phrase has been translated, or the meaning of echad has been translated for 2,000 years. Yeah.
Like first chapter of Genesis told about bara Adam Echad, Zachar v'Nekeva bara utam.
Okay.
Echad, unit.
Okay. But that over there, I think, is not a good
two parts.
example, because over there it's the collective. It's the collective we're talking, because the word Adam.
Androgynous.
Yeah. Well, either androgynous, male and female aspects, or universal man.
Yeah.
Adam doesn't mean a particular individual necessarily. It means, if it's a particular individual, it carries the meaning of the universal term man. So that's a little tangential, but related to this whole thing. However, I want to stick very carefully to this first point, is the meaning of echad in the phrase Basar Echad. And so it's been translated, and because of this emphasis on the quantity, and from the context there are two people there, from the word echad, we get a non-literal translation. It's a metaphoric translation of the phrase. So from the analysis of echad, they get a reasonable interpretation of the phrase, the whole phrase. Regardless of what basar means, it has to be metaphorical, because you take two people. Quantitatively, two people are two people, not one. So if it's used and say they're one, that means that's a metaphor. One in what respect, and so on and so on. It's a metaphor. So for 2,000 years, the phrase Basar Echad, a locus of sexuality in the whole Torah system, was translated metaphorically as one basar. Now we come to basar, the other half. What does basar mean? Now, if one looks at the Fabre d'Alave dictionary, which, as you know, I worked with for 25 years, I found many fantastic linguistic insights, analysis of the names and places, which was part of the methodology of the text. Like I said many times, the generations from Adam to Noach, there were 10 generations. When you analyze the names that are said, this one gave birth to this one gave birth to this one, you analyze the names on the hieroglyphic basis of Hebrew that was discovered in 1810 by Fabre d'Alave, you see that these names are carrying meanings. And what are the meanings? The meanings are the socio-cultural institutions that were existing at the time before Israel and the Hebrews came on the scene. So it'll talk about when they buried the dead. There was a time when they didn't bury the dead. When they buried the dead. When they had instruction in some kind of a semi-organized way. So that the words that are names, one line name, this guy, Ben this guy, who lived for a number of years, I'm not interested in that for now. But those names are carrying information. it's instead of us, we would say, oh, well, at that time, in this part, they learned to bury the dead. After a number of years, they learned to do this. After a number of other years, they learned to do that. And we would give a number of assertion statements, which would get across to the reader what these things were, what was going on, what did the world look like, the civilized world looked like before the Hebrews came on the scene. Okay, but this is all done in the text by the name carrying the information that's relevant. That's a method point. That's a methodology point in understanding the Chumash. So things could have a meaning in terms of like the location of a place and so forth, but on the other hand, in addition to the location of a place or who the person was, where did he come from, and what was his father's name, and so on, in addition to the biographical or geographic information, there is a linguistic dimension which puts the icing on the cake and gives you more information. So when you have lineages in the text, and I did many of them, I did the Esau lineage, I did the Yaakov lineage, Ishmael lineage, and you examine and you study the linguistic meaning of the names of Ishmael's sons, of Esau's sons, and so on. You examine the names, you get some information that you wouldn't get otherwise. And indeed, most of them are Forshim. Indeed, all of them, nobody picked up anything. There's nobody who got it. Nobody caught this whole business, so that when they talk about the 10 generations, they give this analysis of the names. And so when you look at the text, you see that you have here another dimension of information coming into the material from the name of the place. And of course it could get complicated because geographically a name may have changed, a place may have changed its name. And the question is, did that carry any new information, or was that arbitrary? Somebody, his father was named like that, they named it, and that was the end of the story. So there's nothing that you could learn except the lineage. But it could be that the new name carried information. And of course, you know yourself, when it came to Avraham Avinu, right, and Yaakov, they got new names. Never mind the depth of that whole business, what that's all about. We can talk about that sometime. But you see that in adding a letter Hey to Sarah, from Sarai, and to Abraham, the change of the name was indicative of new information. It was like a new person. He got a shake up and he became a new person, and so on. So all of that is built into the fundament of the text. Okay, but to come back to the basic point. So, from the notion of Echad as non-literal, since there are two people, we already have half the understanding of Basar Echad. Now we're on Basar. So, the Alavei makes the point, big point, linguistically. Basar means shape, in the sense of pleasurable, beautiful shape. We say beautiful shape, beauty of form, most of the time usually of a woman, but not necessarily. We say, for example, she has an hourglass shape. The word basar in the Chumash does not mean flesh and does not mean body.
How do you know?
Wait, I'm going to give you there's a linguistic basis on the linguistic analysis. What we come up with is that it does not mean shape, it does not mean body, and it does not mean flesh. And here's our first very big point, because from now on that misunderstanding is finished. It's all over. The basic translation of basar in this phrase, Basar Echad, has been for over 2,000 years flesh or body. That has been the translation. And what the Olivet points out in his analysis is that basar does not mean flesh or body. It means the shape, in the sense of a beautiful shape, not in a derogatory way. It's in a dignified way. It has a positive dimension, an aesthetic dimension, shape. Now what shape is, that's what he says.
Become one.
And he bases on analysis. Okay. What shape is much deeper than he goes is what I will do later. If we don't get it tonight, we'll do it next time. But there's a whole deep understanding of what he gives as a linguistic analysis which yields the conclusion, shape. Now, he points out, this goes throughout his book, he points out how many misunderstandings came in translation when the Chumash was translated into Greek and into Latin. So in the Latin translation, for example, and in the Greek translation, because I checked it, both Greek is earlier, the Septuagint, but the Latin one is 300 something Christian era, with Saint Jerome, who translated the Hebrew Bible, used the word flesh. In the New Testament, the word flesh appears 150 plus times. In other words, the time, the atmosphere, Saint Jerome, a member of the church, translated the Basar not as the Olivet translation based on this linguistic analysis. He gives a linguistic analysis based on Egyptian. That's his forte. Okay, we don't have to go into the detail. The point is, that's the conclusion. The conclusion is that the meaning of the word Basar has this dignified meaning, and it has the basic meaning is shape. Later on in Jerome, it was flesh, and in the later period, it was body. And so Basar Echad meant, and it's come down to mean, one flesh or one body. I found in one of the translations that came down later, because the English comes in after, to the modern world. But one of the translations was Basar Echad, one flesh, and in one translation they say one, what was the word? Two flesh. In other words, they made a reference in the translation. Yeah, they made a reference in the translation to the fact that we're dealing with two people.
Oh.
In other words,
two flesh, meaning TWO?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to say because it's lid basar.
No, that's another point. But I meant that, I forget the lashon here. I'm not going to spend the time looking for it. But the point is that I found in looking up the pasuk and working through with the alternatives in the English translation, which was 17 something or 18 something, when they translated this Basar Echad, the translation indicated in the translation that we're dealing with two, quantitatively two. And then we're saying Basar Echad. There's one flesh, one body. Okay, now, the first big point is, that's all over. That translation has dominated anybody who has spent time on the Chumash for over 2,000 years and has fed into all kinds of issues that were germane to Catholicism, to Christianity, later to Islam, and into Judaism. And so it dealt related to original sin, to the denigration of the body, in the sense of the body being looked at as opposed to the mind or to the spirit. And so the translation carried all these allusions to different dimensions of the human being, all of which had a derogatory character, all of which, when they use the word flesh, carries a derogatory character. And I point out that there were 150 places in the New Testament where the word flesh is the case. And so I even wrote down a number of phrases that has been used by in the New Testament and by our own Jewish philosophers. In particular, the contemporary is Rav Soloveitchik. Rav, which is not for tonight, now, we're going to get into that. I don't know if we'll get there tonight, but the basic point is that the Rav, in his discussion of sexuality, which he did spend time discussing, we're going to talk about that right away, but the point is he accepted the translation, and he uses phrases with the word flesh in it that the Aleph would turn in his grave, because each one of them is a derogatory meaning. It means like carnal, like the flesh of the animal. So when man has relations with a wife, it's like animal behavior. It's animalistic. And indeed, in the Greek world, man was a rational animal. And what's come down, and it is still the current view, is that when it comes to physiological, biological processes like eating and sexuality, we are no different than the animal. The processes of eating and sexuality, two primary characteristics of life, are the same for us as in the animal. Now, all the research today shows this is not the case. And this was the Torah view. We are not a rational animal. Human sexuality and human eating, aside from its context of sociality and all the rest that goes with it, the root physiological, biological processes are not the same, period. That's where we are, especially after the sexual revolution and after Freud. In other words, the whole idea of breaking up the human being into body and mind, or body and spirit, which was very big in the Greek orientation, and the fullness of medieval Jewish philosophy and religious philosophy has built on this idea, which still today, in the minds of many people, is the case. Whereas what we're coming to see is that even though 98% of the genetic makeup of the human being is, quote, the same as the animal, a human being is a human being and a monkey is a monkey. And the twain shall never meet until we have a big picture of the life system. What is life? And that's where we are in the West, trying to get an entry into the question that gives a scientific-like answer. Because all other answers, social, psychological, and so forth, cultural, are loose. And the reader is not left with anything substantive that's cross-cultural, that's general. If you are in this culture, this is what life means. If you're in this culture, life means something else. So we don't have constraint, we don't have conceptual constraints on the meaning of life, the most important term, certainly in the Torah world. The point over here is that in Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of the Chumash text, Moshe Rabbeinu, he would turn in his grave if he saw Jewish philosophers, somebody like the Rav, talking about sexuality and still retaining translations of the basar, meaning flesh, in a derogatory sense. Now, I say, well, the Rav didn't do his homework. Now, if the books weren't there, if nobody had discovered this mistake, then what are you going to do? You can't blame him. You can't blame the Rambam. You can't blame Yehuda Halevi. You can't blame Rav Saadia Gaon. You can't blame anybody in the tradition, okay, for having that. I mean, who would go and say...
They were dealing with translation? The Rambam was dealing with the Greek translation?
Sure. In the Hebrew, no, we're dealing with the Hebrew. They need a translation.
They translate to English.
They need a translation. What came down as the meaning of Basar Echad was exactly this. And the Aleph comes
Where
along.
did they get it from? They got it from the Greek?
They got it from the Septuagint and from the translations
In the Greek?
into the Latin, where this was the first translation of the text into a foreign language. You could have had a number of years when it was just taken that way. As what else could it be? We talked about Echad, and now we're talking about Basar. What else could it be? Non-literal, metaphorical, and indeed, we're talking about human relations. Well, human relation is bodily, is like two animals. That's the milieu, put it this way, in the back of the mind, the back of the culture. I mean, the Hebrew culture accepted this basic meaning change that was first instituted officially in a translation of the Bible by St. Jerome in the 300 or whatever Christian era. So this doesn't mean there was nothing before, and that, origins are always complicated. But the basic result, put it this way, the basic result that what has come down for 2,000 years as the meaning of this phrase, Basar Echad, what's come down to us is one flesh. To wit, here's the Rav, a contemporary Jewish thinker, who's still, in talking about sexuality, using phrases where it says, flesh. I mean, any person who is sensitive and experientially to human sexuality, to husband-wife relations, I think the average person wouldn't even think of such a thing. He won't even put it into jokes, because there's a certain dignity, there's a certain something, for the moment, in the husband-wife relation, which is to call it flesh is just obtuse. It's just degrading. But the scholarship tradition that used the text and tried to understand the text for so many centuries didn't have the problem. They said, look, I don't talk to my wife that way, the Rambam says, but when I deal with the understanding of the Chumash, this is Pashut Pshat. So I'm saying you could be right in the origin, where it came and so on, but the official origin in terms of text came from Jerome, and the Aleph in his Perush makes the point, because part of his whole rediscovery, shall we say, or restoration of biblical Hebrew based on the hieroglyphic, is that many, many terms and many, many phrases took on a meaning that was absolutely contradictory to the Egyptian base. He's starting from an Egyptian hieroglyphic base of the Hebrew language. He's calling it the Hebrew language restored, meaning the biblical Hebrew language that was based on hieroglyphic restored. And what had taken its place was translations based on the Septuagint and the Vulgate, St. Jerome translations. So he points out in a number of places that, well, I'm bringing in a revolution. I'm saying we have to, once and for all, cut through these false meanings and then ask, what is the phrase referring to? What does it mean? What is the thing? He doesn't ask that question, but he gives you the linguistic analysis that he uses for other terms, other words in the text. In addition to his lexicon, which is 200 pages, he has a Perush, an interpretation of the first 10 chapters of Genesis, and we're dealing with chapter 2. So here we have the first big world historic point. It's not me. This point is the Aleph. But now he's online. It has to be, what he says, has to be brought out to every thinker about Judaism and Christianity and Islam. That if they want to understand the text, one layer of the text, let's call it one layer of the text, before it got into the translations, and that layer of the text came down from a long time before the Hebrews were on the scene. It was cross-cultural and so forth. We have to now give up once and for all the wrong translation and now begin to inquire into what now does the phrase mean when we say Basar Echad. Is Echad quantity? Is Basar referring to two people or to one person? And when he translated it, the basic characteristic is shape. What does that mean?
Shape.
Shape. For us, you know the answer. What is shape? What's the answer?
Tselem.
Huh?
Tselem.
No, that's not. That's related, but not. That's tangential a little bit. What is shape?
Surah.
What would you call shape? Shape of the body. They're talking about the shape of the body. When he's giving you the new picture, the old picture with the new translation, and he translates it as shape in a upgrading way, like comely. He used the word comely, nice looking. Somebody that has a nice looking shape. I said hourglass. Hourglass shape is a phrase that indicates that, mostly of women we say, that the person has a body that's shaped, with curve here and a narrow waistline,
To be one shape.
Okay. So now it seems to be saying, on this view, it seems to be saying, Basar Echad, that they were one shape.
Nice.
So even though they were two people, that doesn't leave. That comes in from the Echad side. Even though there were two people, there was one shape. Now, what are you going to do with that? That's the combination of the Aleph with what we did before about Echad. What do you say about that? What are you going to say? How do we put together shape with Echad? And what we mean by shape is the shape of the body. How do we put that together? Any ideas? You got the question? You got the question clear? We're trying to understand, we're still in the inquiry phase. We're trying to understand what Basar Echad means when we change the input from flesh, we change the input from body to shape in a upgrading, not comely way. Beautiful shape. What does that mean? So there are two people, two bodies, and one shape. That's where we are. How do you put that together? It seems insoluble.
I think you have to go from a realistic painting to an abstract painting.
Good. Good. Your intuition is on the ball. What do you mean? So now give the answer. What do you mean?
That idea, the shape, that idea of unit. Yes, idea. It's like God. It's
Okay, but that's not. I want. Freddie got the answer. Come on? What's the answer? How do we put it together?
You're talking about in a sexual union that they're in?
Yes, that's the story. They're in a sexual union.
Right.
So how do we put it together? For us, you got it. So clear. For us, shape is the skin covering of the body. The surface. The surface which provides the bounds between me and the table and so forth. The surface of the body covered with its skin, which is taut, on the body. And for us, shape is a property of body. The surface. But in a drawing, if I asked you to make an experiment, I'll give you a piece of paper and I tell you, draw the two people in union, okay? You have one shape, unless you separate it by a space. If you separate the drawing by space on the painting, then you in effect make two. If you don't separate it, you have one shape. You have one shape because it's continuous. The line is continuous. We in the West say, well, one shape. It means like when in an embrace. In an embrace, when you embrace your wife, you can't quite see where you end and she begins. Because your arm is here, you take a picture this way, even if you take a picture, sometimes you don't catch the, you know. And in relations, it's the same thing. So we're dealing with body, because after the relations, the people separate. And there are two bodies.
Sexuality, אתה מדבר
Yeah. That's the context
sexuality.
that's the context of the story of what they're talking about. They're talking about husband and wife, sexuality, and relations, and what do we say? The usual view of the material on the when it's not shape, one shape, see, two bodies but one shape. They say, well, it's two bodies and two shapes because after they separate, each one has its own shape.
I was thinking more abstract. That it's
Yeah.
two bodies, but two shapes, but one shadow.
Okay. But what you meant, what I'm taking from what you meant, was exactly the point. On a flat surface, in a plane, not three-dimensional, what we call in our language two-dimensional, we solve the problem of one shape and two bodies. One shape. And we're not dealing with body.
Well, shadows also.
Okay,
two-dimensional.
that's very important. Part of the notion of shape is tselem, like you hit it before, and tselem is shadow, and the person's, it's so rich you can get crazy. Part of the whole picture, these words in the text, is, shall we call, implications or extrapolations from this new meaning of what we're talking about, the shape. And tselem, like the person's tselem, goes with the person, and is a kind of a shape projected from the light. If you walk down the block, go to shul, and the sun is over here, you get along. I look like I'm a giant from from one end of the street to past the shul. Okay, so it's related to that. That's an important thing. I don't want to get into that for the moment tonight. But the basic point is that whereas for us, what blocks us from even thinking about it, now that I say it, it's not crazy, right? It's not nuts. I mean, in a flat space, okay, in the flat, on the plane, you have, the shape is continuous. So it turns out that it's not a question that when you're in an embrace or in sexual union, you can't see where the person ends and where the person begins. That's body talk. But it's all derived because it begs the question. I mean, you assume the two bodies, and indeed, that's the truth. That's the fact. People separate. So when you separate, they're two bodies. But on a plane, the shape remains one shape. So the translation, the end of the point on this thing, the translation of Basar Echad means that call it the experience, for lack of a better word, call it the experience of the husband-wife relationship is one shape. Now we have to define what that is. What are we talking about? But the beginning point to enter the discussion is, before we do, is this just simple analysis of that we wouldn't think of that answer. We wouldn't think of the answer because for us, two-dimensional space, two-dimensional thing is a derivative from three dimensions. The basic paradigm is body, three dimension. And as you know, when Einstein came and treated time as a fourth dimension geometrically, so there was essay contests. What does that all mean? And so on, and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. But the basic point is, aside from the Einstein point, the basic point is that for us, the skin and the surface is the surface of a body which is three-dimensional. Yeah.
Who gave the translation for Basar meaning shape?
No, this is the analysis. This is the Olive Age analysis.
Why does he say Basar means shape?
Well, that's the analysis of the thing. He gives you a whole business here of linguistically. Basar means shape in the sense of pleasurable, beautiful shape. We say beautiful shape, beauty of form, usually of a woman. Sar, or tzor, contains all ideas of movement towards consistency, corporeity, elementary form, physical force, in the sense of life energy. The verb basur means to inform in the sense of announcing a thing, showing a pleasant physiognomy that pleases by its beauty. We say she's a hourglass shape, and so on. It includes form, configuration, exterior opinions, corporeal beauty, substance. And for him, is not limited to body as we use the term. The translation of basar as flesh bypasses all of this positivity in the word and has taken on a negative connotation. Le Basar Echad, with the lamed, is best translated as to, in the sense of in accordance with, or related to, or as exemplary of, the exemplary of. The subject of the verse is v'hayu, the husband and wife, that's plural, the husband and wife, shall be, with respect to exterior form, one and the same in the positive sense. Basar Echad is a metaphor for intimacy in husband-wife sexuality, includes the aesthetic coloration and pleasurability. Basar is as flesh, basar as flesh, misses all of this and is derogatory. Moses would say in no uncertain terms that phrases like powerful push of the flesh, the suffering of the flesh, respect for the flesh, mortification of the flesh, wrestle with the flesh, weakness of the flesh, employs the flesh, a community bound by flesh, cry of the flesh, oneness of the flesh, comprise one big degradation of the human being, especially his and her sexuality. Where did I get those? Those are from the Rav. Every one of those phrases was from Rav Soloveitchik. Okay, now I'm not in a praise-blame context. If you have a tradition that's gone, that's been for 2,000 years, nobody will, put it this way, it takes a tremendous blitz to say there's something else. I use my favorite example about non-Euclidean geometry. Until 1830, geometry meant Euclid, period. There was no second geometry. So therefore, what you said, and this is a principle that I stress many times over and over again, what I found in philosophy is that when you have two things, you can differentiate them. You can raise questions that ask, what is this and vis-a-vis that, and what is this, and so on and so on. When you have two, you can compare them. And the net result of comparison is both are indicative of something, both are characteristics. One has a dominance, the other doesn't. One is wrong completely, and in other words, you have alternatives when you can compare. So if you looked at the literature in mathematics, in philosophy of mathematics, before 1830 and Lobachevsky and Riemann and non-Euclidean geometry, the questions they ask, the kinds of things they talk about in trying to explain to somebody, to a philosopher, what mathematics is and what it's not and so on, you will see fundamental differences in the exposition because we now have two geometries and we can compare them and we can say what is one got the other. Now, to come to the question in the first place is a blitz. I never studied it with respect to geometry. I don't know where it came from. What was the history of the origin of this? How did it come that somebody got the crazy idea that there's a non-Euclidean geometry? Now, when we're dealing with geometry, somebody showed that the parallel postulate was not consistent with the rest of the axioms, and so it was coming from a rational understanding. But in normal life, when you don't have a rational understanding, how do we enter? How do we enter to get the question in the first place? Now, for me, on this issue, it's not me. I read it in a book. I say, well, why didn't a great representative, Yahadut, with no physicians, Rav, why didn't the Rav, the book was available, why didn't the Rav probe the word? Well, there was no context. There was no question. There was no doubt that was bothering him. I'm bothered by the problem, what is the Chumash view of sexuality as located in these two phrases? Well, the Rav doesn't write about sexuality that way. The Rav wrote a number of things about sexuality, some in the 50s, late 50s, and one in The Lonely Man of Faith, which was a going away gift for the death of his wife, and in these writings, and apparently this was 1966, The Lonely Man of Faith. In the earlier writings, he did spend time on sexuality, which since that time has been reprinted in a book called Family Redeemed, wherein the Rav brings down, or they printed up some of these early essays that the Rav wrote in 1959, which was 10 years, 8 years before he wrote the Lonely Man of Faith. And so they brought down in the publication of the Rav in a book called Family Redeemed. They put down here and they printed up a number of the Rav's essays on sexuality. And of course he talked about the family, he talked about the child-parent relation, he widened it up to talk about other things, he brought in the halacha and so forth, but the basic point is that in this analysis, in this material, you still see the carryover of an accepted translation that was wrong. He uses these phrases, which I'm saying are degraded. So now, I'm not in a praise or blame context at all, because the Rav, as being a thinker, a great thinker, living in the sexual revolution time, the post-Freudian world, the post-sexual revolution world, when he talks about sexuality, many of the points that are in the psychoanalytic and personality psychology literature are included in his discussion of sexuality. Not all, but many. My point is not to criticize the Rav on his understanding of the human sexual relation of husband-wife. No, my point is that in the text, he has a section in there in one of the essays where he talks about sexuality in the Chumash, sexuality in the text. Over there, he's a miss. He missed the point. And all of the stuff that I did by taking off from the Alaveh on the positive aspect, on the beauty aspect, we'll get back to the notion of shape. Wait, but the basic dignity is all missed by the Rav's analysis. But some of the psychoanalytic and Freudian points and Jungian points, personality psychology points that we've gleaned, we haven't been standing still for 50 years. I mean, there's been research, David knows it probably better than me, but there's been research and work on different aspects of human personality, including the sexual relation, and we are not as we were in the medieval world. I mean, we've gained knowledge and so on, but still, in a contemporary writer, here we see a carryover of a very misguided translation. I'm not blaming, I'm just saying that's the fact. All these phrases that I quoted, I got from reading the Rav's book. Incidentally, it's a great piece. It's a great peace and so on. By the way, incidentally, something that relates, in Turkish, I happen to get that from the Google, I don't usually get much, but this I got was a gem. In Turkish, the word Basar is a very popular, dignified male name. Take it for what it's worth. Now, again, the point is here that I'm just bringing material to bear to open up a different way of looking at and understanding the meaning of the phrase in the text.
Where's the phrase used?
In the Chumash.
Where?
In the Chumash.
Where's the
In the
first
second
used?
chapter it says, a person shall leave his parents, his mother and his
The
father.
second chapter.
Yeah, chapter 224. A person shall leave his, not a person, it says a man. That's also a big, big point. Why doesn't it say the woman? It's directed to it's masculine. It's directed to the man, to the male, to the husband. And that's another big point. Each one of the little pieces are important and take on a different direction when you're starting from a different starting point. I'm going to say things about this sexuality that you'll say, where did I get all this from? Where did I come to get all this? I'm just following out a chidush from the Alavei on the meaning, on the linguistic meaning. He didn't deal, I don't agree with him what he says about his interpretation of the first chapter. I disagree with that. He's too medieval and too medieval philosophical. Okay, I don't agree with that. But his linguistic analysis, in most of the places that I found it, was pay dirt.
How does it relate back to God taking the rib out of Adam?
Oh, wait a minute. Great question. Great. What, you want
Well,
to-
because it does say closing up the bus.
Right. And now what do we do with that? You hit it on the... See?
What do we do?
You're following in the questions. That alone shows you're on the target. Because you're asking questions now and making comments that are putting me, I gotta do the talking. You keep putting me on the defensive. I gotta spell out what's going on here. Okay, so what do you want to say before I get to the question?
It seems to me that basar as shape or form is not sufficient. Because otherwise, lots of other things, inanimate things should be referred to in terms of basar.
Well, in principle they could, but if it's unnecessary, why would one
but the
want to
fact
do
that it's always referring
Okay,
to
okay,
something that has blood, and this whole thing nefesh habasar
Yeah,
badam hi.
Okay.
You can't really, you can't get away with it. So
Okay.
you would to me, it seems like you'd have to put another couple of adjectives
Okay.
onto shape, like
Right.
living,
Yeah.
breathing
Okay.
form.
Okay.
Or
This is a very
or,
good criticism, but there's a good answer to the question.
Okay.
I heard a good attempt
There's
to
a
get
good
away
answer.
from one flesh by the warhead, really. Some Rav, it was written or someplace, that the one flesh is the children. You become one flesh through the children.
Look, I mean,
But it's an attempt to move away
but
from...
it's moving away from the context of the
But it's trying to find the solution for what you understand
Okay,
as the problem.
but it
It's a
goes out of
different-
the context. David's point is more to the point of sticking into the context and saying we have to add something in order to prevent this usage of the word when it's connected to
because
the
otherwise,
blood.
if you
And
never see it
What's
Right.
the
in
general
any
term-
other context,
What's the general term for shape?
surah,
Surah.
Surah.
It's almost connected, but surah.
No, I'm only saying.
That's what he said there.
Okay,
when
but
you're
David's
reading.
point is
there
more
is
to
actually
the.
that's
But what he said
that's
in the
an
list.
interesting point because tzadi and
But that's
and
what you
sin
said when he started
are
reading the
interchangeable.
definition there
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
the surah.
That's a very good.
Yeah.
That is a very legitimate point, actually.
Yeah.
But that was
Yeah.
Sin and
Yeah,
tzadi
yeah.
sometimes
He
being
makes it-
interchanged.
he makes it here.
Litzachek.
He does this
He
here.
says that here.
He does this here.
Yatzar.
He uses the word sure, shin vav resh, sure, okay? Shin vav resh is part of the explication, and sar, samach resh, as part of the explication. So that in his analysis, you have these two roots that are put together, and you can read it for yourself. You get the text and you read it right there. It's online in the first chapter, and you can read it.
By the way, I don't know if this is just happens to work out this way, but some cute thing to go along with it is livaser.
Yeah.
You could call it in form. To inform.
Right,
you have
right.
form and then you have
Yeah,
inform.
he says that.
What inform means to.
One of the things he says that it means to inform.
Okay.
Right there. I mean.
Right. It's a
Right.
it's
You're
sort
right.
of a pun on the English word form.
Yeah, you're right on target.
But,
You're right on the target. That's what
yeah.
he uses as an example. To announce and to inform, and a package of words of that nature come right out of here. He brings it in the analysis.
But it's I mean
Okay, but
there's
the
certain
answer-
there's certain psukim like I'm looking up about eating the meat. I mean it's
Yeah.
Habasar asher yagar b'chol tameh. I mean, it's like
What?
they're talking about or talking about
No, yeah.
nefesh asher tochal basar.
Right.
How do you get away from that meaning meat?
Okay. You're absolutely right. And Freddie raised the question about.
He's eating beautiful
Wait
shape.
a minute. Don't jump. You know, since we didn't do anything for 4 weeks, I studied. I did a lot of work.
Okay, great.
And the answer is very simple. The answer is that depending on the context of what we're talking about, two-dimensional and three-dimensional are the same. In other words, in one context, we can talk about two-dimensional, in no way connected to body. It's not a surface of a body. In another context, like the context you bring about meat, when it's translated meat with the blood in it, red and so on, so on, so on, it's in a context where we are talking about body, about three-dimensional. In other words, depending on the context, we have two different meanings for the same phrase. If Basar Echad was put in a different phrase, we had some information that said it was talking about meat, the meat with the dominant and so forth. So then it would be three-dimensional, and the word shape would not apply. He wouldn't
See
do
what
that.
Picasso does with the human body.
That's right. No, I'm saying in the art is the best. The best illustration is
why
the art.
Why is he doing that? He's a genius. Why? He's a genius as an artist, right? He's recognized as a genius. Why? What is he doing by doing that to the human body? What does he see?
Freddie's right. I mean,
Okay.
so now
I'm
you're
asking you.
No, I'm
talking to
answering the question, but what remains is, okay, I show you that in a different context. They're talking about, like, look, on a map. Take a simple example. A map is a two-dimensional representation of a geography, which is three-dimensional. You go out in the street, you have to walk up, you schwitz and so on. It's not flat. We have a map. In a map, put it this way, a map for us is an abstraction from the real thing, the terrain. But for the way of thinking that we're talking about being exemplified in this analysis, what I call Moshe's understanding, that's not the case. It has nothing to do. When you deal with locations, we live in a flat space. There's nothing whatsoever to do with terrain or anything else. For us, we can't conceive that. Pedersen makes the point many times that the way old Israel with Moshe taught and thought is not our way. And so it's very different. In some places he says it's almost impossible for us to understand, to get a picture of an alternative view. And words even they're just not rich enough. They just can't They just can't cut the ice. So here he's writing a book on words, we're using words to explain, and he's showing you there's no logic. They don't have the concept of logic. They don't have you imagine, just think. Here's what he says. They don't have the concept of predication, which means the ball is red. That's predication. The ball has a color red. The ball is red. A subject and a predicate, which are connected, okay, by an is, whatever, a copula, and that's called an assertion. They do not have assertions.
Who doesn't have a
The biblical world does not have assertions, or shall we say, the biblical world doesn't have the primacy on assertions. For us, we automatically deal with assertion. We automatically deal with assertion because that's the paradigm that's been since Aristotle formulated logic.
What would Chomsky say about biblical semantics as opposed to modern semantics?
That's a good point, but I don't know.
He says there's universality.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Chomsky has missed this because he's dealing with his references. The beginning point is Descartes. He has a book called Cartesian Meditations. So he's already in a modern, contemporary epistemological framework where we have distinction between logic, epistemology, metaphysics, and so on. So Chomsky already is, I don't know the answer to that. But I know, the point was, how did I get into this whole thing for the last 6 months? How did I get into the whole thing? I said embedded in the first chapter of the creation story, which is how God made the different things that we didn't make, embedded in there is something deeper or additional, namely how Moses thought about the world. Mm-hmm. And so in 6 days you have 6 categories. Thing or existence, call it thing, day 1. You can't see anything in the dark. And so darkness and light it carries the meaning thing. Second day is differentiation. You can't have any thought without making differences. Second day is Havdale between this, between that, and that. Third day is space. When you look down from the top of God pushing the water together and so on, you saw circles, a body of water surrounded by land. Yabashah, dry. It didn't have water on top of it. So the third day is space. The fourth day is time. The notion of time. The most important is that you have lights in the sky, okay, which are related to the notion of time. First, to tell time, to have natural periodicities when the moon, and then the question over there I asked was, why isn't the woman's periodicity the fundamental thing for time? Because it's a clockwork repetition of a period. Okay, that's a separate point. But the basic point is, day 4 is time. So we have the thing, differentiation, space, time, and 5 and 6, which I didn't discuss when I first gave the point over, was left open. I said we come back to it. 5 and 6, what are they all about? So just as an aside from this, but it's so interesting. What's the 5th? 5th day is the creation of the wild animals, the non-domesticated animals, right? Mm-hmm. All the things that are the snakes and all the things that are non-domesticated, wild animals, 4-legged and so on. And the 6th day is the creation of the domesticated animals, including the birds and so on. If you read the text, you'll see that's what it is. It's domesticated animals as distinct from wild animals. Well, that's the way I took it.
Fish and birds and then land animals, I thought.
Yeah. Well, that's in the cosmology. In the cosmology, we're talking about the different species. No, we're talking about different species of living things. The vegetative is done earlier. Now we're talking about animal forms. Birds, right. Fish, and human beings, and animals. Right. Okay, but the context, the way I put it, was that day 5, the Psukim are talking about wild animals. Wait, I'll tell you why I say that. And day 6, they're talking about domesticated animals. So, day 5 it dawned on me, what are they talking about? They're talking about how wild animals destroy living space, destroy the at-homeness of people living in a community. All of a sudden, the wild animals come in and they trample to death over houses and everything else, and this community has to rebuild itself. Okay? Or a volcano comes in because the day is talking about all of these circumstances. The tsunami comes in, a volcano comes in. A volcano comes in ancient Peru and it destroys the unit. There's no more city. So what we're talking about, the topic of the fifth day in the analysis that I'm giving is the fearfulness. The way the person fears the things that he didn't create and that can destroy him at any moment. He may think he's in control. He ain't in control. Look what happens. Look what happens. In addition, we have 9/11. In addition, we have things that the human being does that create fearfulness. Like you asked the question how people live in Israel. Don't you have a fear of going in the street? Don't you live every day with a fearfulness that the bus is going to be blown up? Well, for sure, the hour and day that the bus is blown up, oh yes, in the mind of everybody, there's a stream of consciousness that can be labeled fearfulness. Now, of course, most people say, well, look, we can't do anything about it, so we'll live with it. And we'll have to live with the anxiety and insecurity and so on, so on, so on. And one of the great problems of human civilization is how we live with all the variations of fearfulness, anxiety, and so on.
Sacrifice to the gods.
Well, okay. Okay, so the point was that I tried, from this takeoff, I took off from this idea of wild animals, okay? I took off from that idea to generalize it, and I told the reader I'm not going to stick to the agricultural society of the time. I'm going to put the fifth and sixth day in modern terms. And so, modern terms means exactly this, that we have to do, and then what is involved in clarifying all of that. Clarification of day 5 is clarification of kinds of fearfulness, kinds of anxieties, and how the human being has the capacity to weaken them, to live with them, and so forth. And indeed, it's going to turn out at the end of this discussion about sexuality that one of the big fearfulnesses that exists in contemporary civilization is the uneasiness, the anxiety. Fearfulness is not just pachad. Fearfulness is not just that you freeze. Fearfulness includes a wide array of discontents, I called it uneasinesses, anxiety. It's going to turn out, when we finish this analysis of sexuality, that perhaps the biggest uneasiness and its implications exists in the husband-wife relation. In other words, one of the, shall we say, anti-life inputs into society and civilization comes from the domain of the sexual when it lacks certain things. And you'll see later, we'll get into what does it lack and how we still are going to define Ezer Kenegdo and Basar Echad. We're only on the beginning part of the linguistic dimension with not enough clout yet on the notion of shape, which remains open yet. We didn't meet your argument. Because if I can show you a context where the translation means shape, as differentiated from a context when it means meat, three-dimensional with the blood in it, not raw meat that's been around, which it turns brown, but meat with the blood in it, fresh, has a freshness and so on. So in one context, basar means enochinami, basar means meat. Which, if we ask, is it a body? You say, yes, it's a body. It could be skinned. We have a lot of history of skinning meat, for preparation and so on, and cookery. But the basic point is that for us, the notion of body is like always in the subconscious of the mind, ready to be applied to different things in different contexts. Body is one of the fundaments. Body as differentiated from the mind, as differentiated from the spirit, as differentiated from the emotions. Body is one of the fundamental basis, thought basis of civilization. And so it's automatically there, it's not put out.
The change from flesh to body is trying to make something of people. Flesh, meat, people don't see a cow. When you say flesh or meat, you see a piece of meat.
All
It's
right, so-
incomplete. It's not a complete shape of the cow.
Okay,
So
okay,
man and woman separated is not the complete
Okay,
shape of
okay,
mankind.
That's related, but
Seeing,
not to
removing
Okay.
a piece of meat, a bone, from Adam to make the woman.
Okay.
So it's a reunion,
Okay,
which makes the
Okay.
body, or what you would
Okay.
say, the complete shape.
okay.
Because people say flesh, meat, they see a steak, hamburger. They don't
Okay.
see a cow.
Okay, but I'm trying to make the point that we're context loaded, depending what context we're talking about. I'm trying to undo this unconscious predilection for body by saying it depends on what we're talking about. So when we're talking about meat, we're talking about a three-dimensional thing, but we don't usually relate like that. We talk about the flesh.
It's not talk about meat. It talk about one material. Flesh, it's material.
Okay.
One material unit of.
Okay.
This meaning.
Okay, but material means body.
Okay.
Okay,
It's
no,
body.
But I'm
it's,
saying-
it's Homer.
oh,
It's one Homer.
right.
Only this. It's not
Okay, well, I'm trying to
go
show
so
you.
far.
I'm trying to show you that he's not talking about that. He's saying that in the context, we can, to use a bad word, we can abstract out something that we want to relate to. That is the shape. And now I have to explain what that means. We gave examples, like in the flat, and so. But we didn't explain it yet. But all I'm trying to show is in the text that there are different meanings of basar when we're in a different context. Now, to come, 1 minute, I'll come back to that. To come to Freddie's point, we have in the same chapter, right, chapter 2, chapter 3 of the Gan Eden story, the creation of Chava, creation of Eve. Okay? What is that all about? Now it turns out, take off from the elevate, that in the anatomy of the woman and the man, there's place in this low midsection where there are folds, when you can't, here the skin is tight. Here the skin is tight. Over here, in this area, near the congenitals, in this area there are folds. And how was Eve made? He makes this point. Everybody translates it as rib. He took the rib, which meant he cut into the body and found the rib, formed the rib into Chava. Okay? So the Alavei points out explicitly. What he did was, he took the folds, the foldings, the convolutions, the convolutions of shape being tight to shape being, like bumps. If you want to grab somebody, you grab them here, you got something. You try to grab here, it's too tight. It's tight to the body. So the Alavei points out that not understanding what was going on, Salot Tzav, whatever the word is in the text, not understanding the word, they translated it as rib. It's the wrong translation. It's not a rib. It's the folds in the skin. that are in the human anatomy.
And what difference?
And wait a minute. So God took those folds.
Also Zelle.
Yeah, right. God took those folds. God took those folds. God took those folds. God took those folds and formed them into the chava and had to sew it up. Not sew up the body. It says there. You got to close it. You got to close the opening. What was the opening? The opening was taking a two-dimensional surface and folding it. Here it was taking a three-dimensional, because when it was on the person, it was part of that shape. When it was cut off or whatever from the person, so it was flesh. So God took that flesh and formed chava, no cutting of the body or anything, and that had to be sagar, had to be closed. So he closed up the making, like having a piece of clay.
Closed up Adam or closed up Eve?
He closed up Adam.
Okay.
That's what the text says. All I'm saying, this is the Aleph. If you read his account of that day and that word, he gives you in detail the linguistic basis that he's putting down. I'm not spending the time on that because it's just, you could do it for yourself. You just take my word for it, that's where he's going. And this is what it is. So he's just saying that it's been mistranslated as rib. And it's not a rib.
Does that make a difference?
And it's, no. So to the analysis, okay, so first, we're talking now, if we wanted to say basar over there is these chunks that are hanging out on the person.
But why would it say
And that's
Zot hapam etzem me'atzamai uvasar mi basari?
okay,
Sounds like it's
meaning-
bone and
yeah, flesh.
love
but-
handles or
Right,
whatever.
right. So that's
But
what,
he's saying bone too, which
yeah, okay.
and it says echad me'tzalotav.
yeah, okay.
What's one bone with some flesh around
Yeah,
it?
but you got to read the Aleph, and he'll point out that what they're referring to
yeah.
is not the body of the person or the skin or anything. It's referring to these clobs of flesh.
What about the bone?
The bone is fine. It's not, the bone isn't the problem. The problem is it's like skinless and boneless. I looked it up on, I couldn't get anything.
Right.
In sardines we say skinless and boneless.
Right.
Or we say in the Bitu, he's skin and bones.
Right.
Right? He's skin and bones. We don't say he's flesh and, we do say he's flesh and bones. But the point is that, this you got to read the Aleph. You got to read his point. He gives you the analysis of the word. He gives you analysis of the context. And he points out, like he always does, how the translations, in this particular case, they didn't know what to say. They didn't have a picture. They missed completely what he points out is in the picture and has to be related to, namely that the skin on every part of the body is taut and lends itself to being a surface, but also a shape, because in the flat we can, in two dimension, right, we can take the paper and fold it and tie up the where it is. So the point is, he's trying to make over here, when he gives the analysis of the word, he's saying it doesn't mean rib. It doesn't mean that God entered the body to get the rib. You don't see. The rib is inside under the skin, the rib cage. So the picture that most people have, well, God cut the rib, cut the skin, went into it, got the rib, formed the rib, and closed it up. Sagar, that's what it's talking about. And it's a reasonable picture. It doesn't, okay? So what's the point for us? The point for us is that your question is good. And the interpretation you gives chizuk to the old view. That when we say Basar Echad, we mean something like the convolutions. That's why it's relevant here. Because it's this pasuk, even though it's in a different context, It's not talking about the husband-wife sexual relation. It's talking about the creation of Eve. Okay? So he's saying, the Alaveh is saying, yeah, there was a creation of Eve. The mashal over here is he took this basar, okay, and he shaped it into a woman, and it's under Ezer Kenegdo, and there was enough similarity of form and so on, shape and body to say, this is my zivug. This is the person that's for me, my other half. Remember, this is all taking place in the context of Ezer Kenegdo, the other phrase of sexuality. There are again two loci of sexuality in the Chumash. And I say it with emphasis because I have a big critique of the Rav, not on his understanding of Freud, his understanding of personality psychology. The Lonely Man of Faith was an article in 1966 which was dedicated, or was given over, it was dedicated to his wife who just died, but it was given in a conference on mental health. If you read the subtitle of the piece, it was given on the Rov's participation, 60 pages piece. It's a long article, published in Tradition. One, I think it was his first entry into the big English world, of journals and all of this. And this was the whole point. And so, my critique, it's not that he's totally obtuse, or what he says about the man-woman relation is just shtuyot. To the contrary, he has some beautiful things to say. My point is, when he has a section in the book on the locus of sexuality in the Chumash, the Rav was part of the people who said, this is a metaphor for sexuality. What does that mean? For the intimacy. So what does he mean? If we only have two loci for sexuality, what the Rav is saying, and what everybody said for centuries, has been that Basar Echad is a characteristic of Ezer Kenegdo. Because Ezer Kenegdo, helpmate, did not only mean that the wife works in the field. That means having children. That means having sexual relations. The fullness of what Ezer Kenegdo means covers a full array of activities that require cooperation of the human being. We're born a social being, and we have all of these dimensions, including the sexual dimension. So that sexuality now is linked up or associated with Ezer Kenegdo, not with Basar Echad. So here we have a package, and what you said about the basar, my bone of my bone, and so on, it gives a chizuk to say, well, I'm on the right track. It never would dawn on me anything other than that. Well, he comes along and gives you a different translation. It doesn't refer to that. It refers to these lumps, in the skin. I mean, it's not me, it's him. He says, here's the analysis, here's the linguistic analysis, take it or leave it. I'm not arguing. But the basic point is, what it does for me is put the emphasis not exclusively on Ezer Kenegdo, but puts the emphasis on the addition or the co-joining with another locus, which we still didn't finish, of Basar Echad. In other words, to sum up this point, what I'm trying to show up to here is that the thrust of all the writings about sexuality in the Chumash, not in general, in the Chumash, anybody who says that it's concerned with flesh missed the point. And the main point is that he, in effect, said by saying Basar Echad is a metaphor for intimacy of the husband-wife. Intimacy is part of the Basar, part of the Ezer Kenegdo. Friendship. The Rav mentions friendship in Aristotle. Friendship, degrees of friendship, relationships, sexual relationships, intimacy, less intimate relation. Somebody once said, one of the Rav once said, not the Rav, my Rav once said, he said, somebody wants to borrow a dime. Okay, so you give him a dime or $1, whatever it is. But then somebody else comes to the door that you don't know from Adam. So you don't give him $1, you give him 50 cents. Somebody comes in who just, you never saw him for 50 years. He comes in and says, I'm very short, I need to borrow something. But, there was never a telephone call, a combination, nothing. So instead of giving him a half $1, you give him a quarter. In other words, there's degrees and levels of what I call concern. There's concern and care. And there's a whole big piece that I wrote about the nature of concern and care and what's the difference. But the basic point is that there's concern. The human being has concern to do something about these things that come in from left field, from the negative side, things that destroy life. And on the other hand, to do things that enhance life. One of which is improving human relationships. The main one being the sexual relation between husband and wife. So that what the main point for me is that the emphasis was shifted. When talking about sexuality, the emphasis was shifted from Basar Echad to Ezer Kenegdo, the two loci. So what in effect we have is one locus. Because what we said, one is a metaphor. It's a metaphor of what? Of something other than Basar Echad. It's a metaphor of, so I say it's a metaphor that's related to the work that's being done by the human being to improve and weaken anti-life forces and improve life forces. That's the work. That's what we're doing. That's what the person does. So the important point is, for me, that it shifts the emphasis to Ezer Kenegdo, and
That's good.
no, that's good. It's not a question of good. It's a question of functions. That in functions in society, there has to be Ezer Kenegdo. There has to be relationships of all kinds, work relationships, cooperation and development. Man is doesn't live alone. I'm not going to talk about loneliness tonight in the above picture, but some other time I will. But the basic point is that in Ezer Kenegdo, under that title of helper, is included the full array of behaviors and activities that make up civil society, that make up
To
civilization.
be one flesh.
But one flesh.
Necessary? Why is that even necessary? I mean, it's like redundant. I mean,
Yeah, why is it redundant?
well, you need an instruction to have sexual relationship.
Okay.
I think, like our friend.
So
here
you're
said-
right.
Our friend
So-
here said it's to create a unity.
So I asked you.
A unity.
So you just gave a
To be one body
reinforcement.
is to create a unity.
You gave a reinforcement.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Reinforcement you gave. You say, look, everybody
whole
says it's a
thing,
metaphor
one
for intimacy. Okay.
What do you need it for?
Wait a minute. Intimacy. So intimacy now I'm relating to Ezer Kenegdo as part of this full array of activities and things. So Freddie asked right. So why did the text? I didn't write the text. Why did the text put in Basar Echad so that you have to use a metaphor to explain it, which in effect takes it out of existence? Why do you need it? What does it add? Your question is the bottom line. That's what I got to answer. What does Ezer Kenegdo add to a simplistic understanding of intimacy and sexuality?
You don't need an instruction book.
Right. Good. You don't need an instruction book. What does it add?
Dr. Levinson, I
Yeah.
don't have any of these problems that you've been going through for the last hour when I look at this piece of text.
What problems?
First of all, for me, it has nothing to do with sexuality.
That what? What?
It has nothing to do with
That's what we just said.
What has nothing to do with sexuality?
This Basar Echad and all
That's
that.
what we just said right now.
Well, but I mean, but
So when I go through this, all the questions and points you're raising don't have any.
look,
What does it have to do with?
But look, wait a minute.
That's what I'm saying, it has to
They're
do
two
with.
different questions. First of all, it looks from the context that Basar Echad has to do with husband-wife relations.
That's accepted.
Now you deny that?
Yes.
So then we're in a different. Then okay. So then
No, he
we're,
agrees with you.
When I'm going through this developmental, it's
He
going
agrees
to
with you.
it holds a completely
Wait, say- all you're
different,
saying-
yeah. Okay. So but
That's
that's.
the
But wait,
tradition
wait.
that it's one flesh.
Wait a minute.
That's
You're
sexual.
going too fast. You're going too fast. First Chaim Meir's point. Look, if you come along and give a total different interpretation of all of these phrases and the whole first chapter, that stands on its own and is independent of what I'm talking about. It's nothing to do with that. If you could show a real package of arguments that is such that it eliminates all the stuff I'm talking about, well, I'll be the first to back it off. To say, on the other hand, that you have a different interpretation that has coherence and consistency and so forth, but does not force out of realization what I'm talking about, then we have two different things, and we can judge the two of them. But I think it's overstating the case to say that Basar Echad has nothing to do with sexuality. That's the context.
I'll send it to you in writing, we'll talk about it all.
Yeah, okay, anyway, I'm only saying, but my point is the two different things.
I'm in the first category. I just looked up the stuff that I had written, and it just goes consistently all through without ever getting involved in any of these arguments.
Okay, but so what? So I say
I
good.
thought you were saying the same thing.
I say good. No, he's talking about a different thing.
No,
He's
but I thought
saying
you were
that-
saying also it doesn't have anything to do about sex. That it's only that for 2,000 years they're saying it has to do with sex becoming one flesh. You're saying that's the meaning, the human relationship.
Okay, but Chaim Meir is talking about something else.
No, I thought he was talking about.
No, he's saying he has a different picture.
But he's
of
saying it
what
doesn't
the
have to
text-
do. That doesn't have to do with sexuality. I thought you were also saying that.
No, I don't think. I think he's saying that the idea of flesh demeans sexuality.
Yeah.
Is that what
Oh.
you're saying?
Sure, of course.
Okay, so that's
Not
what
that it's not about sexuality. It's that talking about
Degrades-
sexuality in terms of flesh.
That's what I said. I
I'm saying it
said.
has nothing
I
to do with
said
sexuality.
that the tradition for 2,000 years, and including a contemporary thinker who uses these phrases,
You're bothered
indicates-
you're bothered by the language.
no, it indicates a degradation.
Ah.
A degradation of sexuality.
I don't know because
Or it should tell you that it should be enough to the reader to understand that it couldn't be talking about sexuality, that you gotta go look for something else here.
Yeah, but I mean, but you got to show me.
That's referred to Chaim.
He'll present it, but the point
I'll
is,
take a separate session.
yeah, sure, you got to present it, but the basic point that it's coherent, consistent is not sufficient. It has to be unique, such that it eliminates all the stuff I'm talking about.
David, sign me up for a session one of these years.
Okay, anyway, that's the point.
A text don't speak about sexuality anyway. A text try to explain why the man must to leave his parents.
Yeah. Why?
Why? And to stick with
Yeah, a woman. Why?
Why? Because the woman was made from his
Okay.
This is only this.
Okay, so
Don't speak any.
well, but in the translations that have come down and the meaning,
Where you
They're
found
saying this is
sexuality.
Well, yeah,
Don't speak
Rav-
about sexuality.
everybody, I mean, that's the standard meaning. The Rav tells you, Basar Echad is a metaphor for intimacy.
No.
Im-
No, there's a unit. The
Yeah, a
only
union, fine, a
The
union, fine. But what does it
Unit,
mean, the
one
union?
body. It's like a body politic.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
one
yeah.
body, one
Okay.
unit. It's like Ezra Negdo or whatever.
Okay.
It's, now you are together.
Okay, I'm buying all of that.
So that,
But I'm saying,
that
so your
knocks
question
out-
is right. So your question is good. Why do we need it? What is it adding?
No, but it's not.
Why do we need that phrase? We should have had one locus.
You know, if you don't, then you only
But,
need.
but it is talking about
So
sexual
then you only need
No, it's
Ezra.
not
Then you only need.
Ezra Connecto.
You know, if it doesn't mean anything about sex,
it's
if it only means unit, so the Ezra Connecto also means create a unit.
Yeah, that's what it is.
why do you have to say
So
why do you,
why is it redundant?
it's like in Shema. We talk about you gather, there's the rains, and then you'll have crops that will grow, and you'll gather them, and there's this whole kind of series of things, and then that culminates with ve'achalta v'savata.
Okay.
You'll eat and you'll be satisfied. That eating and being satisfied is the culmination of this of that sequence.
Eating it
Okay.
satisfies
In this
two
case,
different.
in this
Okay.
case, the sexual relation is the culmination. It's talking about the culmination. Food and sex, or
Right,
like
okay, so-
like that. These are
So,
that. I'm
So-
saying it's not superfluous
what's not superfluous?
to say that they should be Basar Echad is not like you don't need that. No, you're filling it in. Just like
Why
you don't need
do we
to.
No,
need
but
this
why-
Like you don't need to say Ve'achalta v'zavata. It's obvious that
Yeah,
when the
but
rain
why-
grows.
what does it mean?
But
Why
one
do we
minute,
need
one
it?
minute, 1 minute. You're going on the old view.
So I'm just.
No, no,
I'm sure-
wait. That's,
I'm trying to
what you're
explain
doing,
what's super-
yeah, what you're doing is elaborating, quite rightly so, on the usual understanding of the translation of what it means linguistically, and conceptually, ideationally, you're going on the assumptions that were there, and you're showing the contribution of what that's going on. Oh, I agree. There's no problem. But you're going on the old assumption. You're not relating to what still has to be done. Is what does that mean when we say shape? I'm introducing on his basis a different meaning, and I'm going to explain what that is. Why do I keep it? Why do I keep it? You're asking the question, where does it come in? It has no place. It's all covered. So it's redundant. We could have said, if we wanted to talk about the intimacy, we should have, it's implied right in the pasuk of basar,
You can-
of
to
flesh
talk-
my
to
flesh
talk-
and my bone and bone.
To talk about two people in a union having a specific shape is a beautiful way to describe it, and it's great. But
Well,
it's still
I don't.
it's
well,
still you're talking about the end point
okay.
being
So
some sort of
so now your
physical
answer.
union.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now
Well,
your
you're
answer
saying
is.
it's not.
So now you're
I
on
know,
those
I'm saying that,
assumptions.
it's fine.
So on those assumptions, your answer is, it's aesthetic.
It's what?
Aesthetic. It's a beautiful way of the text to say that.
You
Okay.
can talk about it in different ways. I'm just
Okay.
saying
Okay.
it's a
So again,
metaphor. or
Again.
this and
what I'm saying is, you didn't relate to what I'm talking about. You're saying that the traditional understanding, the translation linguistically, and the conception, the understanding of what's going on, is such that it makes 100% reasonable sense to talk about Basar Echad in the context not of the man-woman relation, but like Zachary said, in the context of a man leaving his parents, okay, to become Basar Echad, and I guarantee you most people would say that he's leaving to make progeny, to have progeny. That's what probably enters the stream of consciousness of most people who read it, because the goal is progeny and not sexuality. Where I'm going is not progeny. Progeny is part of civilization. But progeny is not what sexuality is all about. And I need something to localize, to make as a locus for these things that I'm going to talk about, to explain and fit into the pshat that he gives about shape. We didn't finish it. You left me hanging with I got to do the talking. I'm just trying to show and give an answer why that's important. And one of the reasons is because procreation is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the relation between husband and wife in civil society in general, right? When we look, and underneath the whole analysis, not conceptually, but rhetorically, is that we today in Western civilization live in an environment where the inadequacies, call it that way, the aberrations of husband-wife relations permeates, to use a strong word, permeates the entire culture and is the basis of all aberrations in society. In my language, Freud would say you can't have a cup of coffee without anxiety. We live in a world of anxiety and uneasiness, however language you want, I call it under fearfulness, I don't care the language. We live in a world where the basic, one of the two basic characteristics of life is the sexuality, the husband-wife relation, not limited at all to procreation, but the ingredients that are involved in the relationship. And that is what is at the bottom line of stake. And we're living in a time where most of the anti-life dimensions of society are coming in from the aberrations of man-woman relation.
Like abortion.
Now, that's a strong statement. I personally, I firmly believe that, and when you read the material, we're going to get into it. It's probably not tonight because it's too late, but we're going to get into, as we advertised in the thing, or at least I don't know if you said it there, we're going to get into the narcissism literature. Self-love, what's loosely called self-love. And we're going to get into the narcissism literature. And I'm going to show you part of the answer in form. Part of the answer to why it's called shape and not body, okay? Why the unity is in a two-dimensional space, not a three. And why it's called shape and why it has a dignity. Because I saw in the literature, when it comes to aberrations of narcissism, you have tons of stuff. I read 10 papers in doing the preparation for the class. So, and I went back to Freud's paper in 1914, who wrote one of his early papers was on narcissism. Very worth reading. It's online. You can read it yourself online and so on. Okay, so Freud was dealing with the etiology, with the development, with the sexual base of where it comes from and how it originated, blah, 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 blah. When you look at the material, and in Freud especially, there's nothing from the positive. It's all from the negative. If you ask the question at the end of what they call, they use the word healthy narcissism, self-image, self-love, whatever. Where's the definition? How do you define the difference between self-love, okay, between narcissism that's healthy and narcissism that's unhealthy?
That's Freud's term. Freud says healthy narcissism.
It's full in the literature. So, the answer is, it's not clear. They don't have any answer. So what I say was, and this is where I'm going, I'm saying that in Basar Echad, there's an ingredient that does not exist in all the other sexual relations. Most sexual relations have the ingredients of unhealthy narcissism. That's what's causing all these problems in society. Because there are subtle variations of narcissism that's unhealthy. That's what occupies 20 pages off Google when I read all these papers on narcissism. What you get is, it's all from the negative. There's nothing from the positive. Freud gives the origin and the development. Okay, fine. I'm not.
Freud give anything positive in narcissism?
No. There's nothing positive. So what I'm saying is, as a postulated, as an assumption that I brought in, that has nothing to do with the literature, I'm saying in Basar Echad, there is something positive that does not exist throughout the other ranges of sexuality. And that is what we're calling in this loose terminology, healthy narcissism. It exists only in this special case of Basar Echad, when we translate it in the new way of talking about form, about shape. And I'm going to finish up with that point, what the whole, to close the picture. So I'm postulating, this is not Freud. Freud's not even dealing with the text, it's nothing to do with it. I'm saying that most instances the vast majority, if not all, of instances of uneasiness, anxiety, fearfulness in the sexual domain are, in terms of narcissism terms, examples of unhealthy narcissism. When you read the literature, and I give you 25, 30 pieces, and I make a list of all the unhealthy things, wow, it's unbelievable. It's staggering how the feelings and the mind and the relation between the man and the wife are such that right there you could see the aberrations and the anti-life results. Stealing the dignity, lying. I mean, read the thing, just take the thing, plug it in, you'll read 25 characteristics, put them in a list. They're all from the negative.
It's an interesting contrast between Catholicism, which is sexuality only for procreation, and Judaism.
Yeah.
It's not only for procreation.
Okay.
Because you have sexual relationships even when the woman can't conceive.
Sure. Now the Rav, for example.
But how do we understand?
That's what I meant.
How do we understand that?
Right. So the Rav, you're right on the target. The Rav, that's what I meant by saying I'm not criticizing the Rav's understanding, whether he understood Freud and then look. There's ways of reading. When I read Freud, I put myself on trial. I was concerned with me, what makes me tick. I wasn't concerned with understanding Freud in an abstract way to give a class. Well, maybe the Rav didn't read Freud. Maybe he read Freud, but he didn't examine himself. How do I know? I don't know anything about the personal relationships. And I tell the reader, I'm not entering into personal relationships of how he was with his wife and how he wasn't and what he missed and what he didn't miss. Was he a yekka through and through? Did he did this? Did he go to bed with a top hat? I mean, I'm not concerned with that.
Is that an aberration?
I'm only relating to the fact that here's a fantastically brilliant, and I mean it in a serious way, a real deep, as you see, even from reading the book, even these essays that I read, I increased my respect for the Rav even more than I had before. Because he's on the wall. And he makes the point that in the halachic dimension, in the action of the mitzvah, of course, we're concerned with a full range. We're not just concerned with procreation. We're concerned with children, and he gets into things that I'm not concerned with at the moment, about the parent-child relationship and so on and so on and so on. I'm localizing my analysis to the sexual domain, the sexuality, divorced from propagation, that's not the main thing, and to bring in this whole aspect and keep a locus in the text, I'm talking about in the text. I am not talking about his understanding. I'm talking about in the text. If he didn't write a section in the book titled, I don't care whether he put the title in or not, about sexuality in the Chumash, in the text, then I have nothing to say about the Rav. My critique of the Rav is that he didn't investigate thoroughly enough a concept, an idea of sexuality that was richer than what looks like it's come down. He touched on it, but he didn't probe it deeply enough, and therefore all the stuff that I'm talking about he missed completely. But he still shows that he's part of Western civilization. He wasn't an idiot. He knew something about Freud, whether he read him or he didn't read him. Not everybody reads everything. Not everybody puts themselves on trial. Not everybody is concerned with, when you're a personality psychologist, they say, well, go into psychology because you've got a lot of problems, you want to work them out. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with that? To get more information, get more understanding of who you are and what you want, what makes you tick. Isn't that part of growing up for every person? I mean, so the more insight you have, of course you can get confused. You can get confusion by who's the big guy. Who are you going to read? Who are you going to read? People get confused by Jung and Freud. Now I read both of them. Well, Jung is Christian through and through. Freud is Jewish through and through. That's what the music that hits me. And I wrote the piece on Freud in the book there on Moses and monotheism. I wrote a big section. I called it Moses is Freud. Not Freud's Moses, but Moses is Freud. He hit the button on the thing. He backed into Judaism, what I call Judaism, without realizing it and not being knew all the texts and everything else. He backed in because he was life. Now, what he meant by life, I give a critique. It was too narrow. It was too built on this. There's an overemphasis on the edible content. It was this and this. Blah, 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 I don't care. Those are details that you could modify. But the overall music is a music of life. And Yerushalmi, who wrote a book on Freud, caught it and said, my last chapter is dialogue or monologue. And he said, monologue with Freud. Last chapter, last section, last part of the book, 2 pages. He writes a book on Freud, and he's world-renowned historian, originally Israeli. He passed away, I think, a year ago or whatever. He taught at Columbia. He had the Baron Chair in History. And he talked in his book on Freud. He says, monologue with Freud. The last page. Monologue with Freud. Well, Mr. Freud, in effect what he says is, Mr. Freud, I know that you really are a Jewish person. You caught the basis of Judaism. And you want to be remembered in this book, Moses and Monotheism, which every Jew threw him out of Judaism with. He caused a tumult in 1939 with his book of Moses and Monotheism. So Yerushalmi says, you wanted to be remembered in this book, your last book, as pro-Jewish, meaning thereby psychoanalysis is Judaism, or vice versa. Judaism is psychoanalysis. Right there. That's Yerushalmi's monologue with Freud. In other words, that Freud caught all the stuff that I'm talking about, but he wants to be remembered as this is Jewish. This is the depth of the Jewish soul, the Jewish personality, and all the rest. I want to be remembered in this book as being pro-Jewish and not other religions, not Christianity. My critique is not about Christianity. My critique is about Western civilization being Christian. My critique is not about Judaism, because that would be critiquing my own work. Judaism as identity.
Who's saying this?
Yerushalmi says in his monologue, there's the last page, there's a monologue with Freud. And in that monologue, Yerushalmi caught the music that I caught in reworking the text and bringing Freud back into the Jewish fold. He was a pro-life thinker. Just like Nietzsche said, his motto is yea to life. So Freud would say his motto is yea to life in Judaism. But the way he's been interpreted by everybody in the field, especially the Jewish population, has been that he mavatal. Moshe was an Egyptian, he wasn't. I say these are the details. And he went to the wrong anthropologist. He didn't go to, Levi Strauss wasn't around for him. He would have gone to a great anthropologist, in the sense he didn't go. He went to Fraser, who was the Golden Bough, 4 volumes. Fraser was the main anthropologist for 20 years, 30 years. The main anthropologist before Levi Strauss came on the scene.
Golden Bough was...
The Golden Bough, it's Fraser.
You can read this in the internet. It's very important topic.
Sure, I mean it's part of the he was the king of anthropology. Well, the point being, there's a whole dimension here.
But I think...
So don't ever say that I'm criticizing the Rav. I'm criticizing the Rav only on his misunderstanding of Basar Echad. Let's put it this way. 10 on this note. Let's put it this way. It's one thing to accept something without having to argue it. It's so obvious, like Freddie said. It's so obvious. You don't have to be taught. It's so obvious. Okay, that it's not a question. It's not in question. It's not a doubt. There's no doubt. When we say no doubt about it, we use the language 100% surety, no doubt. But depends who's talking. For who is it no doubt? For somebody interested in the tradition, in how Torah over the centuries has packaged and stated and restated this whole issue with psukim. If somebody's concerned with that as dominant, and the methodology to do that is Chazal, the language of the text, the drashot, and so on, well, it never was a problem. It never was a problem. I'm coming along and saying, wow, how can you live in the 20th century and say it's not a problem? It's the number one problem. For me, it's the number one problem. Human relationships, the way man-wife, it's paradigmatic of that. I say the man-woman relation in Basar Echad, which we still didn't explain, but is the antidote, is the way we'll be able to overcome, if at all possible, will it be able to overcome the anti-life that is coming in from the sexual relationship.
We're saying it has to have a greater meaning than just sexual relationship. It has to be a fuller meaning than just. I mean, it's not.
Okay.
It has to have it's left at it's just sexual relationship.
So what I'm just to give you
right. So it has to have a fuller meaning than that.
Just to give you the clue of where I'm going and what the conclusion is, it turns out that there's a big literature, as you know, on chaos.
Chaos
theory. Right? A guy named Gleich and a number of other people, and there's a whole literature there, where they're looking at the heart and the brain as chaotic systems, whatever that means.
Ilya Prigozhin, you know it? Ilya Prigozhin.
Yeah, sure. The
Yes,
Nobel
yes.
Prize in
I
chemistry.
Prigozhin.
Yeah. Okay. I have his books.
related to.
Okay. I have his book.
Jewish from Russia.
Yeah. I read. He's a Jewish guy. Yeah.
Jewish guy from
It's a
Russia.
great book. It's a great piece.
Yeah,
It's a great piece.
What's the book?
I think he calls it Chance and Necessity, something like that.
Yeah.
I forget it. I have it. It's a very good piece. Very good piece. What was I saying? But I want to say,
Chaos.
So wait a minute. So I got a tremendous blitz the last couple of weeks, and that is, I'm talking about liphonic physics, right? My emphasis in all the work has been not society and not civilization and not all these things, but the advance, a contribution to the science of life. The intuition says, mine, we will be able to get a scientific understanding or knowledge of life and the ensuing technologies. That's an assumption. It's an intuition. It could be very, very right or very, very wrong. For me, all my work is built on that, and the emphasis is put on things that contribute to that. Okay? So that's a bias. The bias is the scientific knowledge. And that goes through the whole thing. So I called it liphonic physics, and I talked about it and so on and so on. In getting across and reading up on some of the chaos theory, I began to realize that there's something else. In the liphonic physics, as one of its fundamental components, I'm searching for what it is. We don't know what it is. I'm saying here's a speculation. And what's the speculation? That one of the contributions to what I call liphonic physics is not only the heart and the brain conceived as chaotic systems, leaving undefined for the moment, doesn't mean random or chance, whatever it means, that in addition to these major organs entering, and it's becoming more popular from the point of view of chaos, chaotic phenomenon, I made the crazy move that sexuality between husband and wife, that includes in it healthy narcissism and is explained or carried by the text by a two-dimensional material carrier is also included in the Liphonic physics. That sexuality is a chaotic phenomenon.
Chaotic phenomenon? Sexuality?
Just like-
no one would argue about
Just like, no, not what you're talking about.
that.
I'm talking, when we talk about, this they have to read up. When these people talk about the brain and about the heart as chaotic systems, okay, they don't mean chance or random. There's some substance to what they're talking about. It relates to fractal, to Mandelbrot. It relates to a number of things. I'm not doing any of that tonight at all.
Functions better on asymmetries.
Even asymmetry is not good enough. Asymmetry is presupposing symmetry. So we're back on the same problem again. But anyway, let's put it this way, an interpretation of asymmetries. Right. I mean, but asymmetry presupposes symmetry. I mean, mirror imaging, whatever it is. As you see, the point is, when we make the analysis, I'm making a crazy supposition. Crazy. As unbelievable crazy as it sounds, the human relationship where healthy narcissism is the fundamental factor, carried by Basar Echad in the Chumash text, is the third big area which is amenable to chaos, chaotic, and what he calls it, the new science. God calls it the new science of chaos.
As
Okay.
relate to shape.
Okay, so now, good. So now you didn't forget the question. What's involved here? What's involved here, when you read the material on the heart and on the brain and so forth, there's taking they talk about if you spread out the intestine in a line, it would take a long, a long thing.
30,
When you
30
take-
feet, 40 feet.
When you take material in the flat, not of the body, and you exude it, we can get it so thin that we need a Mandelbrot analysis, like Mandelbrot analyzes coastline, in a new entry, a new geometry entry to the text. So by putting together in one package the two-dimensionality of shape that we're talking about, I'm saying the continual or the inclusion of this as a research topic in the service of a Liphonic physics is exactly this. And lo and behold, Freud, I forget his language, when he talked about narcissism in 1914 in this paper, he labeled it, I forget the exact phrase, but it was like a phrase that said, we know there's something here, but we don't know what the hell we're talking about. He used that phrase to say, we don't know what we're talking about. We still got a long way to go to analyze narcissism. This is 1914. It's already 100 years since then, and a lot of literature and everything. But Freud made I forget the language. He used a phrase which indicated, we know there's something, I know, he says, there's something here. But I'll be damned if I know what it is. It's such indeterminacy and vagueness, as indicated by my presentation.
It seems like the Greek myth is
Wait a
pretty
minute.
clear.
No, it's not the myth.
The Greek myth, it's based on the Greek myth. Not
Yeah, of course,
the Greek myth, he's in love with himself, he turns
Yeah.
into an animal, he's destroyed by other animals.
Yeah, well,
That's the society.
You're right. What the Greek myth exemplifies is the aberrations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm giving you the positive side.
Okay, but you say no one ever escaped. In all the literature, you didn't find anything positive about narcissism.
Yeah, there's nothing positive.
Okay, but you want to say there is a positive.
Sure,
Okay,
and the
but-
locus of it in the Chumash is Basar Echad.
Ah,
And going further, when you make,
it sounds good if you can explain it.
of course, so I'm saying I'm with Freud, just like Liphonic physics, and you ask always that question like a refrain on Paganini. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What you say? You're the one who says it all the time for 10 years. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? From the negative, it makes some sense. From the positive, I don't know what we're talking about. I postulated a mathematical revolution, analogous to Euclidean geometry, to non-Euclidean geometry. What is that? When I talk to a Heshi mathematician across the street, he hasn't got the foggiest idea of what's available in the mathematics. Reb Chaim Olavasham thought topology was the key.
Topology?
Yes. And topology is very close to shape. Anyway, never mind that.
What's topology as Reb Chaim meant it? What's he talking about?
It has to do with surfaces.
like in the
bounds.
like in maps.
Boundaries and surfaces. Whatever it is, not important. The point is that nobody has come up with anything. I'm postulating the mathematization that's required for a rich science. So I'm saying we'll get a science of life at the level of quantum and relativity.
But boundaries
And further
are
it will
shapes,
show
right? Boundaries create shapes.
and it will show how the life system is the basic science. And a subset of the life system is electronic systems, mechanical systems, energy systems, thermodynamics, and all the rest of all the beautiful things that we discovered in quantum and relativity. So it's a crazy, but that's the solution. That's my solution in the writing of the thing. And we're talking, just like we say, one of the characteristics of this chaos theory is that things in the body are folded. If you read the literature, you see that they're folded, constant folding. And that's part of the subject matter of the chaos analysis of the brain and the heart. And
Is that why you want to say? Is that why you want to say coming from the folds?
No.
That's a different point.
But the basic idea is, that's related, of course, but the basic idea is that we have enough in this analysis, which has a linguistic foundation, okay, it has an ideational foundation, it has a contrast foundation with the negative, and can stand on its own as where the inquiry should be. It sounds crazy, and I said to the reader, intuition can be very, very right, or very, very wrong. Just as we have, every pharmaceutical has an anthropology staff that searches for the cures that are written in the literature, in the tribal literature, and tries to make a biochemical analysis. We get $1 million pill if we can achieve that. So I say, in addition to things like that, where the goal is pharmaceuticals, there are other things. One of which is how they looked at the brain, how they looked at the heart system, and most important for this analysis, how they looked at what everybody called the intimacy, the naturalness, and so forth of the man-wife sexual relation.
So it has to be on a higher level than
yes.
one flesh. One flesh is
like
animals.
Well, and from this point of view, my God, one flesh is a total degradation of the topic.
So it has to mean more than that.
Yeah, and I'm giving you what it means.
One flesh, that interaction, that relationship.
But it's all.
This is
but all your
against chaos, chaotic process.
No, but one flesh just is a course.
No, you're.
Course
There's a number of points. You're making a number of points.
One flesh.
You're making a number of points. You're making a number of points. You're making a number of points.
Cross section.
No. Crass.
You're making a number of points.
Course.
Zach, you're making a number of points. See, one has to do with the value of entering into chaos theory in these contexts. Okay, that's one point. That there are things in the behaviors that seem to counteract and disallow you to use chaotic behavior as the model, as the phenomenon. It's not a chaotic behavior. It's aberrations and it's random and all kinds of things, but it's not chaotic. So there are things in the processes which seem on the surface to be against chaotic explanation. And absolutely, that one of the problems of chaotic theory people is that indeed so much of what goes on in the topic, in the physiology, whatever you're dealing with, can be handled without chaos getting into the picture. For example, it can be handled by randomness, by chance, by emergence. Emergence is non-causal. So what I did, see, you made the critique, but you didn't stick to my analysis. I said that the main ingredient from the positive is the vague notion of healthy narcissism. And Freud labels that and says, again, I forget his phrase, but the phrase was, I know there's something here, but I don't know what we're talking about. And that's all I'm saying. That being interested in in a contribution to a electronic physics, the deeper meaning why this is world historic is not just because we get it for once and for all. Thank God we're finished. That translation is finished. If you read, you got to read the guy and refute him. Refute him. He's on very solid linguistic grounds based on the Egyptian. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so eventually we will grow into it, and all this flesh talk, everything will just disappear off.
It's what does man need in instruction to have sexual union?
But that's not the question.
Yes, it is the question.
How?
Because then it's redundant. It's unnecessary. Animals don't need any instruction. Man is the highest.
But we're not.
No, but you're questioning. I'm saying it can't mean to be one flesh, to have sexual union. It has to mean more than that.
Okay. So I'm giving you what it means.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I'm giving you what it means.
If you look at it and says, what's it mean? God says to have sexual union.
I'm giving you what it means.
What do you need an instruction like that for? Animals don't need an instruction like that.
All I'm
Animals
saying,
don't need the instruction to leave their mother and father either.
that's right. It's like I called, look, let's put it this way. There are a lot of things, assumptions. There's a lot of assumptions here. I made an analogy.
Depends on the species.
I made an analogy to the womb experience.
Right?
There are a lot of interesting
You
suggestions
stick around there.
that the womb experience. The womb experience, it's one unit. The fetus is
Good
attached
point.
to the mother. Okay, the fetus is attached to the mother. Well, it could be the case that a more refined and careful analysis of the womb experience will yield chaotic phenomena. In other words, we're in an area which I'm opening up, like taking a shovel and saying, okay, I'm shoveling away where everybody is and putting in a new piece of grass where the person has to say, you know, let's not just take it for granted. Let's examine it. Let's put the head, the mind, and I, as sure as I'm sitting here, I won't be around here, but we will have an Einstein of biology. We will achieve in a scientific form much of the insight of the Orient. We will achieve it. For me, it's a given. As sure as I'm sitting here, it's a given.
The inside of the organ.
That's where we will be. That's where we're going. And if, well, my interest as Yahadut, the second, whether it's the first or the second, remains a question to me, because I still don't know who I am. Whether I'm a Jew or I'm a philosopher.
Modern.
You know. Okay, well, aside from that personal issue, here we have, with respect to Judaism, Judaism will self-destruct. You can take my word for it. Judaism will self-destruct if and to the extent to which it does not remedy its inadequate understanding, action, feelings around the sexual relation. The halakha, as it is today, is not rich enough to capture. It requires innovation. It requires brilliant thinking, new opening of doors, such that we will have a reconstruction of the halakha side by side with a reconceptualization of Judaism itself.